there's such huge potential in lifelong learning and learning in general to really not only sort of help people to learn. That's almost the most irrelevant part. It's like to provide social structures and support systems for people, particularly in this century. You know, I think it feels fairly safe to assume that there are challenging times ahead and lots of change at the very least, that's going to affect people in lots of ways. And so I feel like learning is investing in learning is the way to invest in supporting people through the individual changes they're going to have to make that will ladder up to, you know, the bigger collective changes that we either want to make or that are sort of happening and we have to adapt to.
You're listening to the SpaceShip Earth podcast with me, your host, Dan Burgess. This is episode 28, where I'm in conversation with Zahra Davidson, co-founder of lifelong learning venture Enrol Yourself. So what is this podcast all about? Well, we're living on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. How bonkers is that? But like a spaceship, we have a finite amount of supplies and an intelligent operating system which keeps everything replenished as long as we all respect it and use it wisely. So an understanding of how this system works, along with deep cooperation between humans and all life, is essential to keep us and the spaceship flying. Someone awesome once said, "There are no passengers on Spaceship Earth, we are all crew." So in this podcast, I'm riffing with humans involved in restoring and regenerating, raising awareness and shifting consciousness, reimagining how we might live more beautifully through creativity, care, ideas, collaborations, community, new forms of business, and much more. I talk to artists, photographers, entrepreneurs, activists, writers, designers, strategists, adventurers, healers, creative mavericks, and many more. I believe their stories can inspire all of us to become more planetary, to fully participate as crew on the Spaceship Earth. So a new year is upon us. Are you starting the year with any big questions? Curiosity for new adventures, or just feeling the need for some personal growth and journeying? Are you scrolling courses online, looking for that elusive new qualification, or contemplating a career change or some new skills? Or frankly, are you just asking yourself what to point your energy at in the world at this moment in time? Well, in this episode, I'm chatting about lifelong learning and the power of peer group support with Zahra Davidson, who co-founded Enrol Yourself, who develop 6-month learning marathons, as they call them, for people who are curious about something in the world, who have a question they're wanting to explore. And what makes Enrol Yourself so interesting is there are no teachers, you write your own curriculum, and you are part of a peer group who all support each other on your own individual learning journeys. Okay, I'm going to cut straight to it. This is the Spaceship Earth podcast, episode 28, with Zahra Davidson from Enrol Yourself. Zahra, welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, very, very, very cool to have you here. We're back on the old internet conversation style, which I've been doing a few face-to-face chats recently. So I'm been setting up my system again, but it's all working as far as I can tell. So yeah, thanks for joining me on this. It's funny. I was just thinking some context. It's Friday. It's Friday the 13th of December, and for us folks in the UK, you know, we're probably, some of us are waking up. We've woken up today. Some of us probably still haven't woken up, or have maybe just turned the lights off. It's a kind of slightly strange day after yet another election, another general election. Which I guess for some people went very well, and yet for others, well, I don't want to get into that. But you know what? The reason I thought it was funny I'd bring it up because, you know, obviously looking at what you're now doing with Enrol Yourself, but it it was interesting because I remember just seeing a little frame on your site which said, I think it said, amidst increasing uncertainty and inequality, individual and collective learning have never been more important. And it just kind of sort of seemed to sort of chime with exactly where we are today. And so I'm really keen to get into, the nuts and bolts of Enrol Yourself. But I'd love to just, I guess, start a little bit with, how was it born? Because it's quite interesting. Because I met you, well, I think when you were part of Year Here, I think.
That's right, yeah.
Which was what, maybe was it 5-6 years ago? Was it
even 7?
Was it 7? Wow.
Ago.
Yeah. And I remember, well, you always struck me as someone with a bit of maverick to them back then, and I was always curious about where you were going to sort of journey, because A Year Here also is, I think you were the first year, was that right? Or
so I was I didn't do the program, but I was Jack's first employee.
Right.
Yeah,
that's right. So but you were effectively there right at the start, right?
Yeah, that's right. I was there at the beginning to sort of do the brand and website and initial communications and stuff like that.
Yeah. And just tell me about this, a bit of context, I guess, before we get into Enrol Yourself. It'd be really cool just to get a little bit of a sense of what your journey has been into now. And then we can really get into kind of like, where Enrol Yourself came from. But almost just like, how was Enrol Yourself, like, what birthed it? What was the journey that you went on for this thing? And what, I guess, because there's also, as we'll get in, but Enrol Yourself is very much based on, at least my understanding of it, of what are the big questions we're asking ourselves, right? So, just tell me, give us a little bit of context for those listening on how we got to where we got to.
Sure. So it begun to be born in 2016. So actually, that is several years now that I've been working on Enrol Yourself, and it really started quite slowly, actually, and it started through conversations with a really good friend of mine, Roxana, who I knew from working together as service designers. And we were both working in separate jobs. And at the time, I had been feeling a little bit frustrated in work, I suppose, and feeling like I could be stretching myself more. And for Roxana, she was wanting to make a career change. And she was wanting to leave behind design and make quite a sort of radical shift in her career. At that point, she wanted to go into sort of therapeutic practices, movement-based artistic practices and things like that. And so both of us had been having a common experience, which was that we were window shopping around for stuff that might fix what we were feeling.
Right.
But neither of us had a big budget. So I'd been looking at all kinds of different master's courses, thinking maybe this will satisfy this feeling I have. I want to stretch myself a bit more or go in a different direction, or follow a curiosity. And actually, I couldn't afford to stop working and study full time.
So there was this. You were definitely feeling there was a pull for more learning. That was the.
Yeah, it was absolutely about following curiosity for me, because I was doing work that was interesting, but I also had sort of questions of my own, really, that I didn't necessarily feel like work at that time was an outlet for. So, for example, I'd been, so you mentioned Year Here, and I'd been doing a number of projects where I was working as a designer, but in a setting which was all about learning and education. And I was really, really interested in that very specific niche area where those two things intersect. And I really wanted to sort of follow that curiosity. And that was another reason why when I was looking around at different courses, I couldn't find anything that met my quite niche and specific needs that I felt like at the time. And so then, between the two of us having conversations about what we wanted, what we couldn't find. We did a lot of sort of moaning, essentially.
Yeah.
And eventually we began to feel like, okay, you know, we have this design background. In theory, we should be the kind of people who design a solution to what we are feeling rather than just talk about it.
I think Gary Hamel used to have this quote, which was like cultivating your dissatisfaction or something like that. And is that sort of vibe, right? Kind of. Yeah.
I've never thought about it that way, but yeah, it was really really like that, because actually I think we became more dissatisfied through talking to one another about it, if that makes sense. Airing it more, I became even more sort of hungry to find something or make something that didn't exist yet. And so from there we started to think about what it was that we wanted, and we thought about it in terms of what we wanted to extract from formal education offerings that we didn't feel fit our needs, but there was aspects of that we really wanted, and those were a dynamic group of people, sort of that cohort feeling, people with different experiences and backgrounds and perspectives, who could support us and inspire us to do what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then the other aspect that we were craving at that time was structure and really some discipline to be able to move towards our respective goals a bit more effectively. Because I think, particularly if you live somewhere like London, but it's obviously not unique to London at all, there are so many one-off events and, you know, fantastic things that you can do for free, even all day, every day, almost. But does that sort of amount to a really meaningful ongoing inquiry that might change your life or what you're capable of? And what we were feeling was that the answer to that was probably no in most cases, and that the consistency of this group of people working together over a longer period of time was sort of at the essence of what we were looking for. And we wanted that without having to pay for accreditation and a campus and lots of tutors and, you know, lots of things that we at that point didn't think that we needed.
Yeah. Did you know at that point, because obviously, you know, you can give us give the listeners when we get a little bit further a sense of like, yeah, what is the Enrol Yourself, I guess, offer today. But there's always for me also that was interesting about this journey interview is that because you don't have like, there's no tutors, there's no sort of expert, inverted commas, right, who sort of holds in the sort of traditional kind of learning sense. Yeah. You always think, oh, you know, I need to do a course where there's and there's an expert in this content or subject and who's going to share their expertise and their knowledge and stuff. And of course that doesn't exist in your model, right? But did you always sense that this thing could work without that? You know, it could work with the group versus the sort of, you know, the expert at the front of the room kind of idea. What brought that around?
Yeah, we did. We did sense that, and we were really intrigued by that idea. And I think that was partly to do with my interests at the time being very niche, and I didn't feel like there were many experts that I could go to. So having other people around me in a peer group was much more about inspiration and accountability and momentum than it was expertise. And similarly, for Roxana, I think she felt like she needed to gain experience and that she would need to connect with others that had perhaps more experience than her, but that ultimately she had to sort of lead that journey for herself. And so, yeah, we were really interested in sort of self-direction and what it could mean actually to kind of to put, you know, ourselves as experts at the heart of the learning experience instead.
Yeah, I mean it's quite I mean, you know, I guess, yeah, that still feels really quite bold. Not bold, but you know what I mean? Yeah, it does feel, and it's very different still. It still feels like a very, you know, this, you know, I guess for folks thinking about like, you know, where do I go to sort of continue my learning journey? And we'll get into, I guess, the sorts of folks that are actually starting to come on these journeys with you. but it does. It's quite. I think I don't know. It just seems to me like sort of knowing that it's quite an unusual ability to sort of sense that you weren't. It was more this kind of support system and process, and the journey itself versus the sort of looking for kind of expert knowledge and experience. Do you still find that is something that's you're working with, that people are kind of is it I don't know, do you know what I'm saying? It's a kind of sort of for me anyway, it feels like so fresh as a sort of way of thinking about this stuff. It still feels like it's that folks to step into that kind of space of being comfortable without the expert feels like such a fresh space to be.
Yeah, and people do sometimes find that to be a challenging aspect of Enrol Yourself, not only to understand, but also to sort of come to terms with in practice as well. I think the thing I'd say about it is that for us, it was born out of necessity initially. So Rox and I were thinking about how we could achieve a really sort of powerful learning experience without any budget, essentially. But actually through then running a pilot and putting that into practice, we began to see just how many unique benefits there are attached to working in that way. And that gave us conviction to continue to do it.
Yeah. So when you did that, when you put the first pilot together and you're putting this out, I guess, to get a first group to come on this journey, how much was fixed at that point in terms of like what was the kind of offer at that moment when you were going out and asking folks to get involved?
Yeah, so we made this webpage, and when we put it out there at first, we had two options. So at that stage we were saying we think this could be a 6-month thing, or we think it could be a year long, and we asked people to sign up and sort of express their interest in either of those options. And overwhelmingly, really unsurprisingly, people were much more up for 6 months than they were for a full year. I think that was quite an audacious thing to try and do from thing. But yeah, at that stage we had an overarching sort of structure that we had in mind, and we knew we wanted to base the whole thing around one meetup where the group would come together, everyone together every 2 weeks. And that's a spine that we still use now. But I mean, largely we were really making it up as we went along as well, but also involving the first group in doing so. We had several sessions with the first group where we sort of talked about what was working and what wasn't, and what we could do differently. So it was sort of fundamentally really moulded by that first group. Continues to be moulded by all the groups that participate, but disproportionately by that first group of people who got involved.
So talk us through, and for the listeners, like Enrol Yourself as an offer, as an idea. What's the pitch? I mean, you call yourself, there's your frame you use, grow yourself together. But tell us a bit more about like kind of what it's all about.
Yeah. So we're all about reimagining lifelong learning through peer groups. So these non-hierarchical peer groups are at the heart of everything we do, and we support groups to work together for 6 months, and that 6-month journey is called the Learning Marathon. That's kind of our key offer, if you like. And a really big part of what we do is support who we call hosts, who initiate these peer groups where they are in their local area or around a theme that they think is really important. So a big part of what we do now is training the hosts, who then host the participants through that 6-month journey. And that journey is really all about 12 people, usually 10 to 12 people coming together, each bringing a learning question, which is a question that frames something that really matters to them at that moment in their life, whether it's a career change, whether it's an idea for a new venture or side project, whether it's a personal thing that they want to do, like overcome anxiety. They come with this learning question that's sort of a burning question for them. And then over 6 months, their host helps them to trade and exchange ideas and experiences and networks and resources so that each person can make progress on their question, and come out at the other end with a really meaningful output, a piece of work in response to their question, but also with a bunch of these new relationships to people that they, for the most part, probably would never have met and worked with otherwise. And so in that sense, I think we see that as a really big part of what we're doing, is sort of building community as well, and helping people to form new relationships. That's the core. And then we've also been working with organisations as well, particularly this year as well.
So it's quite nuts, right? I mean, nuts in a good way, but I'm just saying, like, you've effectively, I guess, again, I'm making big assumptions here, but I'm imagining, people go through their lives. Some people have been, have had some, forms of maybe higher education experiences, gone into work. And then there's this kind of something stirring, which is like this, desire for, or curiosity, or whatever it might be. And sometimes at the moment, in the way that our system, our sort of work life system, I guess, that manifests itself in kind of like, I need to go and do a course, or I need to go and do, I need to go and train myself up to do X or Y, or to get deeper into this sort of specialist skill set, So are you having people who've got that kind of question as well, or is it actually, again, folks that are going, there's something, it's more about me and who I am and in the world and what I'm trying to do? I don't know, there's a sort of slight difference, isn't there? One sort of feels a bit more kind of, I don't know, just sort of almost not linear, but do you know what I mean? Sort of following the kind of path. Whereas this is, to me, says maybe this is maybe like your story, right? When you just couldn't find this thing. But can you tell us a bit about how are people showing up to Enrol Yourself, and give us a sense of that?
Yeah, I think we tend to get a real mix within groups, and now we really try to curate groups that way as well, so that we have questions on a spectrum, if you like, from really, really defined to less defined and more about following that curiosity as you describe. So, for example, we've had people come with a very specific, clear idea for a project or venture that they want to build the foundations for. Their question stays the same throughout the 6 months, and they can work quite purposefully, usually from the beginning, toward that goal. That's sort of one end of the spectrum. And then at the other end, we get people coming with questions about hope, or can hope be designed, or something that's much more amorphous, and is really about that person kind of finally making space to follow that curiosity. And usually in those cases, people change their question quite a lot as they go through the process, as they learn more about it. And actually, I've come to see that change of a question as quite a good indicator that somebody is really immersed and is doing work on their question, because that means that they know something now that they didn't know before. So
they're creating, they're creating new knowledge for themselves and new learning, and it is inquiry based sort of learning. This whole experience, isn't it? We follow essentially a design thinking type process, where the first 2 months of the 6 months are all about exploration and divergence. So at that stage, we're really encouraging people to blow that question as wide as they possibly can, and bring in all kinds of different inspirations and examples, and do research and interview people, whatever is appropriate for their particular question. And then the 2 months in the middle,
it's all about developing ideas. So there's sort of drawing on all of that divergence, what's really exciting or promising or could be viable for them to develop, but keeping at that stage several options on the go alongside one another. And then finally, the last 2 months we call showcase, because we work towards a public showcase event at the end. And at that stage, it is about sort of convergence and refinement and bringing your work to a point where you can make it public and share it with the world. So yeah, sort of it follows a design type process, and so for some people who come into the Learning Marathon, that's really new for them, and for others it's part of their daily work and they're really used to it. So there's always sort of really varying levels of kind of comfort with different phases, actually, which is always interesting too.
Yeah. And so again, so just to sort of clarify for listeners who are sort of grasping this whole idea, effectively there's no teachers. You effectively write your own curriculum, right? It's
Yes.
And the peer group are as much like if you go to do, when you enroll yourself, you're going on your learning journey, but you're effectively helping others on theirs as well, right? That's sort of how it operates.
Yeah, you are committing to sort of providing value to the other people there, as well as trying to find some for yourself. And I think one of the ways, there are many, but one of the ways that we do that through the process is these fortnightly meetups. Each member of the group will be responsible for hosting one of those meetups and running a workshop for everyone else.
Nice.
And we, at the beginning of the process, we get everyone to propose to everyone else. This is sort of 3 workshops I could run that could share some of my expertise, but also give me an opportunity to learn something to share with you. And then everyone else will vote on which one they'd like to see the most. And that puts together this unique curriculum that changes every time we do one of these groups.
Wow. As I was having a dig into this, because obviously I've been sort of following your journey with this from afar, but watching it as you've been, and just super curious. And I sort of dug into it a bit more, obviously yesterday, just before we've chatted, and it's just like I was thinking like, oh, can I do one of these? And then I'm thinking, and then I've actually looked at that, and then the hosting thing is really interesting as well. Tell us more about that as well, because that's sort of how it's kind of how you're sort of. It's sort of kind of it's a kind of quite a living system, this idea, isn't it? Enrol Yourself. It's sort of it's kind of emerging in a way. This host model is quite fascinating. Can you just explain how that all works and why you've gone down that route?
Sure. So the idea with the host for the peer group is that they are someone who has been trained in our approach and who knows the Learning Marathon process really well in comparison to the participants who are coming quite fresh to it. But the idea is also that they certainly aren't the teacher, that they're 100% not the expert, because how could they be expert in all of these different learning questions? And it's very much inspired by the idea of coaching as well. So when we train hosts, they're also trained in some coaching skills so that they can offer that kind of approach to the group, which essentially means that they are there to ask questions and help and be of service to people without ever needing to sort of give permission to anyone or validate how well they're doing. That's for people to really take ownership of themselves. And so that's kind of the role of the host within the group. And they're also a peer. So they also have a learning question too, and they explore that alongside the group. And that's with a bid to make everything as equal as possible, actually, and not to have that real separation of roles as much as we can. And yeah, in terms of then
was that always intentional? Did you sort of discover that on the journey, that having the host also having a question, because I guess it strikes me as like, when if you were sort of thinking about doing this, that facilitator, host, whatever you call it, it almost feels like they would have this independence, but actually this idea that they're also inquiring their own question, that feels really interesting as a dynamic. Was that intentional, or is that something you've tried?
So again, it sort of happened accidentally at the beginning, because Rox and I were playing that role together in the pilot. But of course, the only reason why we wanted to run the pilot was so we could participate ourselves. We weren't doing it to sort of start a business or anything like that. And so we ended up playing that dual role with the first group. And I think, again, through doing that, I could really see the value in it, and we talked about it a lot as an initial group, and how sort of leveling it is really, and going back to sort of an earlier point as well. Like, I think one of the really unique things about a truly peer-to-peer space is how safe it can feel for experimentation and risk in comparison to spaces where you do have an expert or a teacher or a boss or whatever it might be. And so it can be a tricky role to play, and it can be a tension for the person who plays the role of host, because they are trying to juggle those two modes. But we've talked about it now a lot as a community of Enrol Yourself hosts who are running these processes. And I think what we feel, all things taken into consideration, is that it's worth working through the tension for the value that it brings to the group and to the space. I think as well, like, most Enrol Yourself hosts also work as facilitators, and most of the facilitation work they would usually do, they would just be playing the facilitator role rather than both of those roles. So it also just provides this interesting, new and slightly weird challenge to get your teeth into as well.
And has the hosting, I guess this recruiting of hosts, and because you're basically establishing kind of host networks in different cities, right, around the country. And how's that? What's that like for a host? Because I'm imagining also it must be quite quite interesting from a host perspective to be able to sort of offer this back out into their place-based, or into their city as a thing. I'm guessing it must be quite an interesting way for people to sort of put, to be able to sort of offer this system, if you like, back into their place. And have you found? I mean, where is this actually happening right now? Where have you got people doing?
Yeah, so far, most of our groups, I think, so we've recently started our 11th and 12th groups at the same time. All of those, bar two, have been in London, but we've had one group in Birmingham and another in Bristol as well. And I think that sort of host being local to the local area thing is absolutely essential. So when we had the Birmingham group, for example, and I was working with someone called Annika, who was hosting that group, there was absolutely no way that I, for example, could have done what she did there, because it felt so important that she have the authenticity of, being from that area and wanting to bring that there, because she wanted it for herself and she wanted others that she knew to have an experience like that. That felt so important that it wasn't sort of Enrol Yourself trying to expand into this region and looking for participants. And I think that is that's been a really lovely thing, because every host has had quite strong personal reasons and motivations for wanting to get involved and for wanting to do in some cases, sort of uphill work of introducing this idea for the first time in a new place with people who haven't heard of it before. And so what like who is coming to Enrol Yourself, and why are they coming? Like what's to give us a sense of, like,
I know, again, I don't want to like, not putting people in boxes, but just give us a sense of the types of folks that are coming on these learning journeys, and why are they finding that this is what they need?
Yeah. So it's a really diverse mix of people, I would say that first. I think what has happened over time as new hosts have come into our community is that who is coming reflects those hosts to a certain amount.
Uh-huh.
So when I was hosting the initial 3 groups that we ran here in London, people to a certain extent reflected me in that, we were kind of between the ages of 25 to 35 mostly, working in often kind of creative industries or non-profit social enterprise, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, as new hosts have joined us, looking a little bit different themselves, the pool of people who have come has diversified a lot. We're now working with people between the ages of 25 and 55, I think. People from all kinds of different professions, all kinds of different backgrounds. I would say that the uniting factor is all about the motivation to join, and that tends to be about transition in people's lives. So people tend to be attracted to this idea, I think, when they have a personal transition or a professional transition that they want to make, and they either know how to make it but they need support to do it, or they just don't know how to make that happen and also need support.
What would be? Can you get without obviously getting into the personals, but can you give us any sort of examples or?
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
just to sort of bring it to life a bit. That'd be great.
So career change is definitely one, but also restructuring your work. So lots of people have come when they've become freelance for the first time, for example. But people have also come after a bereavement, thinking about how they can turn that experience into something positive, or how they can move forward. And people have also come after sort of leaving a job or being made redundant, or, as we were talking about earlier, with a sort of a sense that there's this curiosity, this purpose that they absolutely need to follow, and they need to make space for that in their life. So yeah, it takes a few different forms, but I think if there's one way of summarising it, it's all about transition.
And people are effectively, and I guess this varies as well with people's context and backgrounds and stuff, but are people sort of fitting Enrol Yourself into already quite, into sort of, other stuff? So they might be working and other things going. Is it Enrol Yourself, is it able to kind of, are you able to adapt and sort of integrate it into, a schedule, if you like, or is it really asking you to commit? I mean, what's the sort of commitment? How does it kind of pan out?
Yeah, so the Learning Marathon is designed to fit around full-time work. Mm-hmm. The way it's designed, it does suit people who have sort of 9 to 5 type work more, but different hosts, I see a real opportunity for them to kind of mold the structure to suit the needs of different people, so that doesn't have to be fixed. The guideline that we give is that it's roughly a 5-hour per week commitment over 6 months. So that fluctuates a bit. We do a whole weekend sort of immersive kickoff at the beginning, and so there's quite a bit of time that you'd spend there, for example, and then everyone's meeting once every 2 weeks, and then finding time to work on their own question, and then there are a few other intensive moments along the way as well. So we found that some people manage to fit it in really, really effectively alongside full-time work. Other people have found that to be really a challenge. I think it depends on, the amount of commitments and responsibilities that people have in their lives. But yeah, we've had flexibility as a principle from the beginning.
Yeah, and because I remember I read on, I think was I was digging into some of the a little bit of the content on your site, and there's someone was talking about the again about like what's really going on with this process. And I think I wrote it down. It's like we weren't asking questions to create resume virtues. We're asking questions to better understand who we are, to improve our lives and the lives of those around us, not to improve our potential for career success. And I thought that was really, really interesting sort of way of kind of framing the experience. And I guess for me, very curious anyway about this, obviously just through my work and my journey, and also just seeing where we are right now in the world, like this kind of deeper questioning maybe that is more messy and not quite as obvious. You know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily fit into a path of professional development, or or maybe that into this I guess maybe this kind of more inquiring, more living these questions more in our life. It just, I don't know, there's something that feels like that the need or the to be able to help more people explore these questions and support that process. That to me feels really what's so interesting about what you're doing. But also when we think about this moment in time, it feels like that's a really intuitively it feels like that's a space which it feels like it's gonna keep opening up for more and more folks. Is there anything in that?
I really hope so, because I think the level of human connection that you can generate by inquiring about those big messy questions together is fundamentally so different than the level of connection you can have if you sort of sit next to someone in Excel spreadsheet class, and I think those relationships and growing those relationships is so important for where we are as people collectively. I really hope that space is opening up. It's a challenge for us, because one of the things that we've actually really struggled with is finding funding and things like that along the way. And I think part of that is because we don't fit into that vocational box that a lot of funding pots that we've tried to access have perhaps expected that responses will be much more about sort of skills and things like that. And there's a really big irony to it, because I think you develop all kinds of integrated human 21st century really important skills through that more messy kind of inquiry. But like anything more messy, it's harder to measure, it's harder to pin down. I think that space opening up is so important for us, and I'm really interested in how to play a role in doing that. But I think there's a sort of a communication piece in there that I certainly don't know the answer to. I
guess that's the dance, isn't it, of like having these kind of like you say, these abilities for people to open up and learn in different ways. So I did this action learning based master's program when I was 35, and it blew my head off, because I didn't know you could learn in that way. And that was more just, again, it was more sort of, it was obviously the content. It was a sustainability master's. It was very, the content and the, was sort of set in terms of some of the ideas that you could sort of explore and work with, but actually you could go anywhere with it. But actually it was more about reflective practice, inquiry-based learning, exploring, having a question, exploring that through cycles of action and then reflection, and a way of thinking about learning that I'd never been exposed to, because it was always just the knowledge intelligence expert at the front of the room, and and you're just sort of passively trying to suck information in and figure out what it might mean, versus an opportunity to learn in a way which was much more experimental, much more based on opening up, not necessarily having answers to stuff. All these kind of and then learning through cycles, and then trying to sort of keep evolving, keep adapting your question, your inquiry as you go. And that for me, I mean, blew my head off. I mean, it was so fundamental. It changed, I mean, for me, changed everything. Changed everything, how I worked. All the things I've ended up doing were sparked through that way of learning. Yeah. And what it struck me at the time was also, I was like, having young children in the sort of in the education system in the UK and the state education system in the UK, and just sort of starting to see also what they were bumping up against, and I was just like, it just feels like nuts that this stuff isn't more accessible. It's not happening more in our sort of institutional learning environments, because. Yeah, I mean, this stuff must be opening up though. What you're doing, I'm sensing that there's. I mean, I don't know, but again, when I look at this, it made me think of also did you come across the like self-organizing learning environments, right? And there was like, what was the one called? Was it School in the Cloud? It was a kids focus, I think. But again, the idea again was like, instead of teachers, you'd have these sort of. And this was focused on children, but it was the same. It's a similar sort of ideas, which is teacher just becomes actually facilitator of and the children have they're encouraged to explore a burning question, and then you had these kind of networks. They used to have like people on Skype that could be like even grandparents that could become sort of children could play their ideas back to, and you'd have this distributed sort of network of wisdom that could sort of. But these kind of ideas just feel. I mean, again, just where we're at right now with the complexity of what's unfolding on our watch, and this, you talk a lot about lifelong learning. It just feels like an area that needs to just blow up to help us through this chaos. But.
Yeah, and so we've just recently done a series of sort of in-depth interviews with people who kind of fit our host profile, if you like. So either people that have expressed interest in hosting the Learning Marathon somewhere, or perhaps participants who think they might like to host in the future, that kind of thing. And we've been asking all kinds of questions. One of the questions we've been asking is about the role of facilitation in the 21st century and how people who practice that discipline feel about that. And I think one of the things that really stands out from all the answers, sort of a pattern, is a sense that there's a shift from teaching to facilitation, a shift from a didactic approach to an approach where we acknowledge the fact that there's so much information freely available online. So the role of the educator is much less about just being a gatekeeper for information. And if it's not about that, then what is it about, and what opportunity does that open up? And I think it really opens up the opportunity for people to have much more individual agency and autonomy, which is really exciting. And I think that sort of teacher to facilitator shift feels really emblematic in a way, really emblematic of bigger shifts that we want to see in this century.
Yeah, I find it sometimes it crushes me watching kids, my kids, other kids, wrestle with not being able to follow what is actually interesting to them in schools, like this. You're just not really being able to use this amazing time that they have to really go into what is kind of alive for them, and then what that does by it sort of beats, And again, so I guess that's the thing. I sort of see this model that you have here with Enrol Yourself, and it's just thinking, just for me, it feels like it was such a big part of the future of learning. It's like, and I'm always just thinking, what is it about our systems that means that these amazing things we often discover when we've already sort of like been through quite a lot of pain. And
it's something about efficiency I feel, like, to me, learning should not be like watching TV, but so much of it is. And this is kind of probably like a rant that I have done a few
Go
times.
and rant. Come on, give us the rant.
But online learning and sort of courses online, I find this so interesting because it gets put in the innovation box because there's technology involved, but in my opinion, there's very little innovation there because all it's doing is replicating exactly the same format of teacher student that we've had for a really, really long time. And I feel like there's so much more potential in technology to be connecting people in all kinds of different ways, online and offline, so that learning can really evolve, and so that some of this stuff that we're talking about can actually, blow up or become more accessible to different kinds of people or spread or whatever. And yeah, I think the way when people get interested in potentially doing the learning marathon, and if they ask me what's going to be challenging or what's going to be hard, one of the things I'll sometimes say is, well, when you're used to being in a class and having a teacher at the front, that's very efficient and it feels quite simple to get your head around. You point yourself at that teacher, and when you come into this peer group, you're going to have effectively 11 teachers around you. So you're not necessarily going to know at first where to point yourself towards, and you're going to have to learn to sort of navigate the resources of that group. And we're going to support with that because we have experience of doing that now, and we know some techniques for making that easier. But I think that's what's really interesting. It's not necessarily the most efficient way, and I think that's why we replicate all these modes that are less interesting, but they're more efficient.
Well, that's like I forget who's the guy who wrote the Utopia for Realists. I can't remember his name, but he talked about this with education and health as being like they're not systems that should be efficient because of, they're the most important things that you get personal on, that learning and health are highly personalized to that individual, and that's the counter of efficiency. Like if you want to do really kind of personal learning programs and personal health care and stuff, then you have to, it needs it's not necessarily even the resource thing, but it just needs the sort of time and a different kind of sort of approach, I guess, and a sort of willingness not to sort of look necessarily at a different set of outcomes, I guess, because that's exactly that. And then he argues again, in the sort of highly developed societies, inverted commas, I would put those around the developed because I never quite know what that means these days, but actually, the particularly very wealthy societies, then actually, you want to be spending loads of cash on learning and health. Do you know what I mean? To make sure that people are really getting the most out of learning, because again, I'm sure this is a thing, but I guess when you've mastered the art of, because it's a practice, right? Learning to be a lifelong learner partly it's learning the practices, right, and some skill sets, because we do have, again, at least in my sort of small way of looking at the world, I always get a sense that we have an education thing that says you stop education when you leave school. If you can afford to go to university or whatever, then you keep going, but then at the end of university you sort of stop, and it's kind of like, I've done my learning, then you go out and try and find a job and realise that actually you got absolutely sod all experience of any relevance to anything, and everything's moving so differently, and half the stuff they taught you was like pretty useless anyway. You know what I mean? And so you but then to be a lifelong learner, that then does set you up. Well, at least it should, and I think it does set you up to be more resilient, resourceful, adaptable. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
able to cope more with the complexities that are sort of thrown up in our lives. And so it sort of feels like, it just feels like a space. It's a bit of a no-brainer. Why wouldn't we be wanting to help everyone to become, lifelong learners?
Yeah.
Because actually, the net effect of that is you could see is a more beautiful world, right? It's just sort of like
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that it's like the challenge of addressing prevention in health as well. It's kind of actually having a learning practice, I think, is preventative of all kinds of different problems and negative scenarios which might relate to well-being, mental health, social isolation, not to mention, vocation and livelihood and all of that kind of thing as well. But it's really hard to sort of make that upfront investment rather than treating the symptoms.
Yeah.
But I just feel like there's such huge potential in lifelong learning and learning in general to really not only sort of help people to learn. That's almost the most irrelevant part. It's like to provide social structures and support systems for people, particularly in this century. I think it feels fairly safe to assume that there are challenging times ahead and lots of change at the very least.
Yeah.
That's going to affect people in lots of ways. And so I feel like learning is investing in learning is the way to invest in supporting people through the individual changes they're going to have to make that will ladder up to, the bigger collective changes that we either want to make or that are sort of happening and we have to adapt to.
And I think this model that you're building here with the peer group learning, it's learning as community, right? That's what's also fascinating about this. You're helping sort of people kind of open up to this idea of learning together versus again the sort of maybe the sort of slightly institutionalized idea we've grown up with, which is learn to get ahead of everyone else. And or sort of, at least that's the perception. It's learning to sort of at least when you get through the school system, learning is sort of framed as a sort of to sort of help you on the myth of the progression of life, into that kind of get ahead of everyone else, get the best jobs, get as much. I don't know, but so learning in community as peers is a peer group there's a lot of stuff going on with this model that you're developing, but that's such an interesting space as well, right?
Definitely. I'm really fascinated about like how you can reframe the people around you, hopefully not in an instrumental way, but as sort of more useful and powerful for your development than you perhaps grew up thinking they were. So what I mean by that is, we have kind of categories of people in our lives, like family and work colleagues and friends. And I think what is at the heart of what we've done is that we have brought people together under another category, which doesn't have a name, which is why it's so hard to describe. But that category is kind of like useful friends or something. It's, where you're coming together and it has fundamentally different rules from a friendship group, and where you are agreeing together to support one another and be of service to one another. And I think that is kind of how communities operate as well. So I think one of the things you definitely learn by being part of a peer group over a defined amount of time is how to probably go back to a community that you're part of, over the course of your whole life or over a much longer period of time, and actually participate more or differently or more fully.
Yeah. I see. Are you seeing that with the groups that are going through the Enrol Yourself? Is there a sort of a it's not like a metric, but are you are you sensing, or are you getting any data or any feedback that people are becoming more participative in their nature on the back of what they go through?
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting sort of evidences of that is how many participants have, off the back of participating, have initiated a community of their own, or started a community of practice, or started a book club, or started an event series, or whatever it might be. There tends to be a really participative thread that runs through, which totally makes sense, but was also a really nice surprise as well, as that started to happen more.
Yeah, and I'm guessing you must have some folks who come into this process, slightly terrified of the peer thing, obviously wanting to experience it, but obviously maybe quite nervous about it as well. But then, and I'm guessing that people go on these, I guess the amount of learning that happens, from the peer group must really kind of blow people's minds in a really positive way. That way of learning, because it strikes me like every time I've done something, like anytime I've done something which is sort of peer related, I've done a therapy thing I did with my wife, and it was a group based therapy treatment, and it was like it felt a bit slightly like challenging when we thought we got there, but actually, like in reflection, it was like it was the group that made it what it was. It's like, and you know what I mean. It's like the content was great and the experience was great, but actually, it was the fact that there were 12 of us, and you heard 12 different kind of stories throughout the process. And it was like, you know what I mean. And so that became the thing that was the gold.
I think I like to think of this in a couple of ways. One is like a circle of mirrors. So if you come into a peer group, it is like you're having your reflection sent back at you from all of these different angles, which is inherently a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Unless you're just incredibly satisfied with the way that you look. And the other way I like to think about it, there's I think it's a Sufi saying. So I grew up in a Muslim family, and so something about community as being stones that will kind of rub against one another in community and rub off the hard edges, or the corners, to kind of polish each other. And I love that, because I think, again, it really sums up that idea of actually that doesn't necessarily sound like it's going to be comfortable all the time. There's friction involved in that, but actually, there's so much value in that as well. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and are you finding? Is there? Are you? I mean, I guess like a lot of some of the threads I'm exploring with this podcast is often this, I guess, creative responses to like a lot of this planetary issues we're facing, and obviously the interconnection of the human issues that are connected to that we're facing at this moment in time. And are you sensing that people are starting, or maybe they are always, but are bringing some of that into Enrol Yourself, or is that bringing people into this process, this kind of uncertainty? And
yeah, definitely. I think one thing that sort of becoming a theme is eco-anxiety, and this kind of idea that actually people are bringing more and more questions that connect to climate and environment, but also that people are bringing big questions about all kinds of different things, because there's this sense of uncertainty, this sense of possibly anxiety. I think that's really driving that, because it makes you feel like you want to be able to do something about it. So if you're feeling uncertain, you want to be able to do something about that. You're going to, I think, want to follow some of those big questions more than you would if you didn't have that imperative, if that makes sense.
No, that's super interesting. And I think just listening to you there, it's just making me think again, like, I mean, this is the whole emphasis of this, working with this, even this working with this spaceship Earth idea of we're all crew, there are no passengers. It's the more you can get involved in your own, in how this stuff is unfolding in front of you, the more you're able to do something about it, the more you're able, even if it's just like learning how to live with some of the sadness, or how to work with some of the grief that you feel, or how to unblock yourself when you get down about it, or do you know what I mean? Like even these, and again, I think that's that whole way of it comes back to, I guess, your thing of this lifelong learning. It's like if you're growing, if you can grow into and through these uncertain times, that creates it's a beautiful counter to the sort of the harder the sadder, more complex stuff these kind of anxieties. If you're able to be active in amongst this uncertainty, it certainly it seems to me that is a really strong, it's a really powerful medicine. It's an antidote to the what the hell do I do about it? It's, well, if you can work with these questions and work with your own feelings, and you're able to then, and also listen to others, etc. That feels so strong. Which I think even things like it's not dissimilar to things when we first connected. We think like things like Good for Nothing, or now you're seeing with Extinction Rebellion. I mean, they're different forms of thing, but they are active, participative based ways of stepping into some of this complexity and uncertainty. And the more you think about it, you think, well, actually, we were talking about this today. Actually, I was talking about this recently to a friend about, again, going back to kids again, because I've been doing a lot of work this year with the school strikers, and you think about curriculum, and you think, well, it's one thing listening to sort of 15, 16-year-olds like talking about these kind of fears they have for the future, and their anger about what they see as a lack of meaningful action, whatever. But imagine then having to go back into school, and you're back into a learning environment where you're not able to explore these questions you've got, or you're not able to find ways to listen to, and you go back to what you're doing, and you think, well, this is exactly the kind of stuff that you'd imagine, like if we could allow our younger generations to be able to work with these questions they've got, how different would that be? You know what I mean? Would the despair be as high, or would it be a different kind of feeling, because they're actually feeling like they've got agency to think, well, how do we move beyond this stuff? Or you know what I mean? Yeah,
I do, and it's come up quite a few times from different people at different times, the idea of should we do this process, adapted a bit, no doubt, but with young people or in schools. And I think that'd be such a fun, cool experiment to do. I think it'd be fantastic, and it makes me wonder whether, because I think the other thing that really comes from groups in this way, like it might bring challenge, but it really brings joy and laughter as well. And it feels to me like, as if there's sort of rising anxiety or despair, that the only real thing we can do is to kind of bring joy up and laughter up as well. Because we can't as individuals just kind of click our fingers and solve challenges. Right. So we have to counteract that in another way. I'm loving the word antidote that you were using before. I think it feels like that.
But you're right. You're absolutely right. And that, again, that's the thing, isn't it? It's always this thing. It's this dance between the kind of darkness and the lightness, and the kind of, the kind of destruction and the beauty and the joy that's there in life. And it's like you work with that. You're able to work with these and to say create a learning environment where there is joy that exists amongst the the more challenging stuff. That's got to be a sound way to, or at least one sort of very solid way for us to be, exploring how do we evolve in light of all this. But I'd love to. I mean, the kid. I talk about the kids stuff just mainly because, again, I think it's just. I've just sort of it's a question I've had. I've held it probably ever since I became a parent. It's just like, why is there not a different way of learning that's available and accessible to young children, particularly in sort of teen years, when that they can start working in these ways. Why do we leave it until we're burnt out and struggling, and we're sort of asking these big questions? And I don't know. I know it's not as simple as that, but it does puzzle me, like why this model that you're building. For me, it's like this has to become more accessible earlier on to people.
I feels like a gap in my knowledge in a way. Like, what is the extent of alternative education for young people? Like, how alternative can it get?
Yeah.
Well,
totally.
Don't think I know the answer.
Well, I know, and I don't either. And I just sort of look at I look at what's evolving, and I think kind of like, we only really have two. You have a private education or state education. There's nothing in between, and then you've got this kind of centralized kind of curriculum idea in the state system, and then you've got a sort of handful of sort of alternative, sort of schools like Steiner and a few other kind of things, but it feels like in the next sort of 5 to 10 years, I cannot see how the education system will cope if it doesn't start having some more experimental approaches within the system, right? Because even things like you've talked about, even things like assets, like buildings, investing in school buildings, and it's just madness. Do you know what I mean? And more of these places that need energy and resources, and require like kids to travel by cars at the same time of day. You know what I mean? All these things that make learning again feel like a destination and a sort of metaphorically as well as the place where you have to, you only learn over there in that building, and and every school must have one of those buildings, and we can't afford. It just feels like this. How is education and learning going to open up in ways that allow people from different backgrounds to start, being able to access these really powerful learning processes, of which you're pioneering within Enrol Yourself, and there are other, there are other models out there, but effectively that idea of inquiry-based learning, having questions and having this kind of peer support, that to me feels like, really big thing. How's that going to sort of unfold? Anyway, sorry, I just sort of threw that in there, but it was just as you're talking, it's just making me think a lot about why these things aren't happening earlier in our lives. I think
I was inspired to see an example really recently, actually. I think it's called Prenda, and it might be a US thing, I guess. But the idea there was a sort of like a network of micro schools, so through homeschooling. I was kind of interested in terms of the model and the framing. Like, could you think of what we're doing as a network of micro schools as well? Yes. But that's something about that really captured my imagination. The idea that, maybe if the school system just fails to adapt as other things are changing faster than they can change, that this network of sort of do-it-yourself schooling might arise out of the ashes of that.
Well, I think that it is. There are some other models that are popping up. So actually, I did a episode 20 of this interview with a woman called Melissa Kendall, and she's been developing this new kind of school quite near me out in near Bath, and it's called Lumiar, and it's a model from Brazil, which is it's a sort of it's a model where they don't have they don't have like expert teachers. They bring in experts from outside the school who run sort of time-bound projects. The children have I can't remember what the teacher's called, but it's more a sort of constant teacher who's more there for their well-being, to sort of understand them and their needs. And it's run through they're literally sort of building this kind of web-based tools, but actually then again the local place sort of opens up its learning network to bring people in who have sort of, they could be artists, or they could be running a restaurant, or whatever it is, again, the kids are exploring. And so there are these things that are starting to sort of come up where, again, they're sort of tapping into these kind of ideas. So my sense is it will open up this I think that you can see, like anything, right? These kind of institutionalized systems, they're just not going to they just can't cope, right? They're not going to last in their current form. They're going to have to be more kind of innovations and experiments that are sort of bringing in different ways of network-based learning, I think. But super interesting. So give us just a sense of like where are you heading? How do people like what's currently Enrol Yourself looking like for 2020? What are the plans? How can people get involved, either as if they're thinking about coming on, enrolling on a learning marathon, or the host program? Just give us a sense of what's coming and and also where you need help. That'd be good to know as well.
So I think the bigger picture of all of this is that I'm really interested, and we're really interested in supporting hosts. So these people around the world, in the UK, but also in other parts of the world, who have facilitation skills and who have ideas that they want to connect people around, and learning journeys that they want to take people on. And I think a lot of these ideas face the same barriers to getting off the ground. And I think that's where we can play a role. So at the moment we have the Learning Marathon, and that's, a tried and tested structure, and we want people to use that. But there are lots of variations on that for different people with different needs. And we're really interested to begin exploring that as well. So the bigger picture is that we want to sort of evolve as a platform for hosts who want to grow local grassroots learning journeys where they are. And for 2020, we are still figuring it all out, but we will be doing another round of host training, hopefully in spring. So that will be an opportunity for people to come and learn about how to host and get access to our resources and our community and so on, to support those people to get things off the ground.
So effective, your sort of effect, that whole offer then is more about you being able to build this kind of infrastructure system support to support hosts all over the world, who effectively then can go out and recruit a group to go on a peer learning Enrol Yourself journey around potentially a kind of theme or connected to something that host has some kind of depth or of knowledge or interest or within. That's the kind of idea, and you can help sort of drive that
exactly
system.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Exactly.
I love that.
So we'll be looking for new hosts next year, and then at some stage after that, they will be looking for new learners as well. So that's one major strand of what we'll be doing. And then I also hope that we'll continue to work on interesting projects with organisations too. So, for example, this year we worked with Friends of the Earth to design and pilot a women's peer support network to help small groups of women take climate action through their personal finance. So,
wow.
Supporting each other to move their pension or their bank account or lobby their employer or something like that.
That's so cool. How did that come about then?
So it started at Friends of the Earth, and they had some insights around women are more predisposed to want to sort of do good with their money, but they feel much more intimidated and unserved by personal finance and those systems. So they saw an opportunity, and then I was connected to them because they had this idea that they wanted it to be about peer support, and so that's how our name came up.
Yeah.
And it was cool because we were able to really essentially transplant our model, but into this new project. So it works similarly with hosts who initiate small groups. They're much lighter commitments. There are 3 sessions that people sign up to with their host. But yeah, it was really cool to use all the same principles in a different setting.
And did you see like what? So particularly for that subject area or that content and that you know, it was women, climate action through like basically like almost just reorganizing kind of your finances and the things that you're support. Is that kind of, that was the idea? Like, how do you actually just become more activist through having more intention about how you use your money and what you support through the systems that we fund and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, like initially sort of spreading understanding that actually, you know, if you have a pension, that might well be invested in fossil fuels, probably is. So spreading that understanding to begin with, and then using peer accountability and support to actually help people to take action. Because I think doing something like changing your, you know, who you bank with, seem like an overwhelmingly boring challenge. But actually, by, you know, like having dinner with a group of other women who would like to take a similar action, and sort of actually having the space to moan about how boring it is, and then help each other through that process is quite powerful.
Yeah, but there's something really interesting about this, though, isn't there? Because you can start to see, again, sometimes, isn't it? It's like, I'm imagining just a handful of sessions, and then you're helping people create confidence that they have the ability to do things, and then sharing stories, encouragement, and then it's almost just, again, it's starting a fire almost, isn't it? in that people have ability to sort of do way more than they think they can. So that's interesting. So you can sort of offer this up into other organizations or other kind of networks that are trying to sort of facilitate change. And so really, really interested to sort of be part of other projects next year and that kind of thing as well, if we can be of service with the experience that we now have with the Learning Marathon. And will you carry on with your own these Learning Marathon offers as well? Then will that continue as?
That will continue. That will continue, and I think with the modification that we think there's a real opportunity to actually support people to start to modify that process to work for their needs. So an example of that would be, I was having a chat with someone the other day who's based in Devon, who's a mum who would be really interested in hosting the Learning Marathon, but thinks that process needs to look a little differently if it's going to work for a group of mums working together. I think I'm really interested in how to start supporting those different versions as well as just the core version that we originally developed.
Right. Amazing. So if folks want to, so basically, how does it work now? Can people reach out about all these things, or how do folks, is it sort of, are you open to more incoming and all this stuff? And
open to anyone getting in touch about any of this, and in terms of sort of opportunity to host, we will share more information very soon, probably first thing in the new year. So, welcome people getting in touch with me directly, but also we have a mailing list that you can sign up to on our website and social media and all of that. And that's how to sort of stay up to date and in touch with what we're doing.
Nice, and it's been great actually just listening how this experiment now is starting to, you've got these different models now that you're starting to build, but this thought that you've got, or this expression you have of grow yourself together, it really does kind of connect all of these pieces, right? And I think it's really exciting what you're doing. I think it's so interesting, and I hope it all really keeps rolling out for you, because I think it feels like more of us, more and more folks could benefit so much from realizing that there is this different way of doing things as well, right? Because I think, at least my understanding is that many people just feel there is nothing, there is no. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I know conversations I have with people that go, well, I've looked at this, they just feel stuck almost.
Yeah.
And I'm imagining that this process can be great for sort of unsticking. I imagine it's quite liberating as well.
Yeah, I think so. I also think there's a gap in the market. If there's anyone who listens to this who's looking for a business idea, I feel like there's a huge gap in a tool of some kind that would help people actually connect to alternative learning experiences. It's so easy to sort of search and find master's courses and all of that, but it's really, really hard for small alternative learning providers who are doing incredible transformative stuff to actually connect to the people who want to do that stuff.
Yeah.
So it'd be great if someone could just make that tool happen.
Zahra, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been super interesting, and really intrigued to see how Enrol Yourself continues on its journey next year and beyond. We'll keep in touch, because I'm really, really, really keen to see where it go. But we'll spread the word. I shall put all the links to all of this into the show notes, and folks can find you. But good luck with it all.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk about it. It's always so useful to have the chance to just have a free-ranging conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
That you think about a lot,
So I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Zahra from Enrol Yourself. And go check it out. Go check out Enrol Yourself. Maybe even enroll yourself. Start 2020, with a big learning marathon. Sounds like to me this is the stuff. Imagine if learning became the new consumerism. And instead of going out and instead of sitting at home and just scrolling mindless shite on Instagram and going, oh, I really want one of those, and really want one of those, you went, oh, what's the question? What question am I really holding right now? What is it about the world that I'm really curious about? And then you went on a 6-month learning marathon instead of buying loads of shite you didn't need. Wouldn't that be pretty cool? Is that possible? Who knows? Who knows what is possible? Anything is possible. That would be a more beautiful world. No doubt about it. Anyway, thank you for listening. It means a lot. This is the last episode of 2019, or the first episode of 2020, if I manage to get it out, depending when I get it out. I'm hoping 2020 is going to be a rocking year for everyone, and lots of plans for the SpaceShip Earth. I think we might have a little bit of help coming with this podcast, which would be great. I'd love to get this flowing more regularly. But really a little bit stuffed doing this on my Todd. But if you like what you hear, please do share it, or give us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps this thing travel. So it'll take literally a minute or less. 30 seconds, but it'll be super, super appreciated. So do that. And if you've got any questions, please reach out. You can get me at dan@thespaceship.earth, or you can get me on Instagram and all that stuff. If you want to know more about what's going on in the world of the SpaceShip Earth, you can sign up to my newsletter, which should be going out probably once a month, to be honest. But there's stuff going on there. Thank you. Look after yourself. Go carefully in this month of January that's upon us. It's always a tricky month. Get outside as much as possible would be my personal recommendation. Try and throw a few minutes in the natural world as regular as possible. That's, for me, is always the medicine that helps January become a really quite interesting month. But thank you for listening. Remember, folks, there are no passengers on Spaceship Earth. We're all crew. Until next time, peace and out.